They vanished without a sound. One moment, a father and daughter were smiling on a cruise ship deck, the sun on their faces, arms around each other, posing for what should have been another silly vacation photo. The mother, long since hollowed by grief, walked past a neon-lit window in a city she didn't belong in and saw her daughter staring back. Not as she remembered her, but older, changed, haunted, and sitting beside a man who made Jessica's blood run cold. Back then, in 2012, it had all felt like a dream vacation. The Millers weren't perfect, but they were tightly knit. David, 42, the heart of the home, part dad, part best friend, was adored by his teenage daughter, Emily. Smart-mouthed and bright-eyed. She worshipped the ground he walked on. Jessica often watched them from the sidelines. Not unloved, but always one beat behind. She had built the structure of their life: school pickups, groceries, appointments. But the laughter, the inside jokes, the selfies, those belonged to Emily and David. Still, she never resented it. She knew their bond was special, and she cherished it, even as she stood outside it, when Jessica surprised them with cruise tickets. That Christmas, it felt like her way back in, a week at sea together. No work, no phones, no distractions, just them. Boarding day was golden, literally. The light shimmered across Port Everglades as they stepped onto the ship. David teased the staff about the unlimited buffet. Emily giggled uncontrollably, and Jessica, for once, let herself breathe. A photographer caught them on the upper deck. Just as David twirled Emily in a mock dance, Jessica watched them, feeling love and something deeper, a fragile peace she hoped would last. They snapped that perfect picture. It would become the last anyone saw of them. That night, in their compact suite, David and Emily shared a plate of room service fries while watching a comedy on the tiny wall-mounted TV. Jessica sat beside them, legs curled, head leaning on David's shoulder, silently willing herself to believe this was the start of something better. Emily drifted to sleep in the top bunk before midnight, whispering a soft "night, Mom," before rolling over. Jessica kissed her forehead. By morning, both her husband and daughter were gone. The beds were empty, their shoes still by the door, their jackets on the hooks, but no note, no noise. No sign of struggle, only absence. Jessica screamed until her voice cracked. Security was called, the ship was searched from top to bottom, cameras were reviewed, passengers questioned, nothing. No one had seen them leave. No footage showed them walking off. They hadn't even scanned their key cards since dinner. It was as if they had dissolved into the ocean air, as if they had never been there at all. The cruise ship docked 2 days later in a fog of disbelief. What was meant to be a vacation became a floating crime scene. Jessica stood on the deck, clutching the last family photo the ship's photographer had taken, her fingers trembling as security led her off with hushed voices and side glances. Everyone looked at her like she knew something, like she was the one who needed explaining. She didn't even know how to speak. The authorities swarmed. FBI agents, port investigators, crew security. David and Emily had seemingly evaporated. No witnesses. No struggle. No open cabin door. The only things missing from the room were their 2 cabin access cards. Not a single surveillance angle showed them walking off the ship. Not one crew member recalled seeing them after dinner. It was like a glitch in reality. 1 minute they were there, the next, gone. Jessica was questioned for hours. Had there been fights? Did David have enemies? Was Emily upset about anything? Had Jessica noticed strange behavior before the trip? She said no to everything, not because she was trying to protect anyone, but because she truly had nothing to give. The ship had 3,000 passengers and crew. The FBI interviewed hundreds. The family photo taken on day 1 was circulated through every news outlet, every port, every Coast Guard station. But no sightings came, not in Miami, not in the Bahamas, not anywhere, and yet something inside Jessica refused to grieve. Not. Yet, when she stepped back into her home, still faintly smelling of David's aftershave and Emily's mango-scented lotion, it felt like walking into a museum of a life that might never return. Her daughter's hoodie was still draped on the back of the dining chair. David's favorite mug, chipped, blue, absurdly large, sat in the sink, untouched. Jessica found herself straightening the pictures on the wall compulsively, her hands needing something to fix, even if her life couldn't be. People grieved differently. Jessica just froze. Weeks passed, then months. She stopped watching the news because every false report reopened the wound. A girl who looked like Emily, always. Almost, never quite. A man matching David's description, always not him. The media frenzy died down. The police case slowed. The public forgot, but Jessica couldn't. She found herself staring at strangers in grocery stores, airports, busy intersections, watching teenage girls pass, wondering, could that be Emily? Just older now? Could she have survived? By the first anniversary, Jessica had moved into a smaller condo. The house had become unbearable, too quiet, too full of ghosts. She didn't throw away David's clothes or Emily's. She folded them neatly into boxes and labeled them not by category but by feeling, hope, memories unknown. In the evenings, she sat with photo albums and traced her finger across each snapshot. Emily at age 4, holding a sparkler. David asleep on the couch, mouth open, hand on the remote. Ouch. Jessica, in the background of most pictures, quietly capturing their world. She often wondered if that had been the problem she had always been watching, not part of it. In her darker moments, she thought maybe they had left her deliberately, that somehow her quiet distance had pushed them away. Therapists told her that was guilt talking, but what else was there to fill the silence? On the third anniversary, she booked a solo room on the same cruise line. She stood in the exact spot where that photo had been taken. Same railing, same horizon, but this time alone. She whispered their names to the ocean. No answer came, just wind, but she kept whispering every year after. By year 5, Jessica had rebuilt the edges of her life. She worked part-time in a bookstore, spoke occasionally to a support group, and adopted a dog she named Charlie, not after anyone, just a name that didn't hurt. And yet, she never stopped scanning faces, teenagers with soft blonde hair, middle-aged men with calm, kind eyes. She didn't believe they were dead, not really. She would have felt it. She told herself this constantly, some invisible thread. Between mother and child it would have snapped, wouldn't it? She would have known. But the years dulled everything. Memories once sharp began to blur. Then came year 7, and a phone call that shattered everything. It was late spring. Jessica was tidying the small bookshelf near her front door when her phone buzzed. The name flashing across the screen made her blink. Mara. They hadn't spoken in a while. Mara had moved to a nearby city after college and now worked at a restaurant in the downtown strip. Her voice came through with urgency. Jess, I think. I saw Emily. Jessica froze. Mara was breathless, her words tumbling over each other. She had been walking home from work 2 nights ago and passed a shady part of the city. It's not far from the clubs and neon-lit shops. Out of the corner of her eye, through a glass window lit in pink and blue, she saw a girl about 21, sitting inside, blonde, thin, still. Something about the way she held her shoulders, the tilt of her chin. I thought I was imagining it, Mara said, her voice shaky, but I saw her again yesterday, same place. And Jess, I swear it's her. Jessica couldn't breathe. It had been 7 years, 7 birthdays missed, 7 Christmases spent lighting a candle alone. She wanted to believe it. She was terrified to believe it. Where? She asked finally. Barely able to form the word, Mara gave her the street. It wasn't a place Jessica would have gone alone, but she didn't hesitate. She was already grabbing her keys. Jessica didn't sleep that night. She tried, God knows she tried, but the image kept playing on a loop in her head, a blurred window. Pink and blue lights, a still figure with familiar hair. The way Mara's voice had shaken when she said, I swear it's her, by 8 o'clock. A.M. Jessica was on the road. She didn't tell anyone. She couldn't bear the thought of someone talking her down, asking for logic, statistics, or proof. This wasn't about probability. It was about the pull in her chest that hadn't gone. Quiet in 7 years, she met Mara outside a faded cafe across from the alley. The morning was still gray, the air dense with city dampness. Mara looked nervous, shifting from foot to foot, her curly hair pulled into a messy knot. Jessica hadn't seen her in person for years, but there was no time for catching up. She's usually there in the evenings, Mara said quietly. eyes flicking toward the corner, but sometimes you can see people moving around inside even during the day. Jessica didn't ask what kind of place it was. She didn't need the details. Yet, all she wanted was a glimpse, something, anything that could confirm or destroy her last thread of hope. They waited for over an hour. The alley stayed quiet. A man swept outside one of the doors. Delivery truck passed, but the window, the one Mara had pointed out, remained still, dim, its blinds half pulled, like it was trying to hide something shameful. Jessica finally exhaled. "Maybe she's not working today," she said. Mara hesitated, then gently said, "Jess, I know what it looked like, but it might not mean what we think." Jessica nodded. She appreciated the caution, but her heart wasn't listening. They returned that evening. It was different than louder, neon-lit, and buzzing with the low hum of nightlife. The alley came alive. Soft music drifted from nearby clubs. Laughter echoed from somewhere around the corner, and then there was that window. Jessica saw her. The light inside cast everything in strange colors, purple over skin, cyan over shadows, but it was her. There was no doubt. The curve of her jaw, the way her eyes sat slightly tilted, even the soft slope of her nose. Emily, she was sitting. Behind the glass, still not smiling, dressed in something too adult, too hollow. Her arms rested between her knees. Her eyes didn't look at the street. They just stared into the middle distance, like she was trying to forget she had once been someone else. Jessica stepped forward, trembling, and then a man walked into the frame, tall, late 40s maybe, stood behind Emily saying something Jessica couldn't hear. When Emily looked up at him, her expression changed, slightly guarded, but not alarmed, like she knew him. The man leaned down, his hand gently resting against the small of her back. It was intimate, familiar. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. Was that David? He looked older. His hair was darker, maybe dyed. The posture, though the walk, the broad shoulders, her mind screamed, it has to be him. But something didn't feel right. He didn't look at her the way David would have. And when he turned slightly toward the glass, just for a second, something in his eyes was off hard. Detached, cold. Jessica stumbled back. Her heart thundered. The city. Noise faded, replaced by the sound of her own blood rushing in her ears. She had found them after 7 years, after funerals without coffins, after anniversaries lit with tears. They were alive, but they hadn't come home. Why? Why hadn't David called her? Why hadn't Emily? Why were they living in this part of the city, behind that kind of glass and those clothes? Mara gently touched her elbow. "Jess, do you want to go inside?" Jessica shook her head. Something told her, not yet. What if they didn't want to see her? What if they were ashamed? What if she was wrong? What if that wasn't David? She went home that night and collapsed into a chair. She didn't cry, not yet. Her brain wouldn't let her feel everything at once. The next morning she returned. Alone. The window was dark, the alley empty. They were gone, like before, like always. Jessica waited for hours. Nothing, not a flicker. She even walked the block, circled back, asked a vendor if the shop was open. He shrugged and said, "People move in and out all the time. They keep odd hours. Sometimes they're just gone for days." The fear returned, stronger now. Had they seen her? Had that man recognized her face pressed to the glass? Were they hiding again? And if so, why? That night, Jessica sat on the floor of her living room, surrounded by photo albums again. Flipped to the last page. A cruise photo. David holding Emily, her arms flung around his neck, both laughing. Could a man like that become the person she saw last night? Or had she just projected her husband onto a stranger's body? She knew. Her daughter's eyes. That was Emily grown, haunted, but hers. She picked up the phone and made a call, not to Mara, not to a therapist, but to the same detective who had handled their disappearance 7 years ago. Daniel Price. He was retired now, but she had found his number in a drawer years back and never thrown it away. "Jessica," his voice said, aged and weary. "I saw them," she whispered. The days after the cruise vanished into memory like the ship itself over the horizon, swiftly, silently, irreversibly. Jessica kept the house spotless, as if David and Emily would walk in at any moment. She never moved their shoes from the front hallway, never cleared David's shaving kit from the bathroom counter. Emily's room, frozen in time posters, on the wall, a diary on the bed, her worn stuffed koala under the pillow, remained untouched. To step inside that room was to inhale grief. Each evening, Jessica sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty seats, her dinner going cold. Sometimes she'd hear a laugh, Emily's laugh echoing in the halls, only to realize it came from a memory, not a mouth. And still she held on, because letting go would be a second death. The investigators came and went. Leads turned cold. A camera on the cruise deck last recorded David and Emily heading toward the pool around sunset. Then nothing, no footage of them disembarking, no struggle, no trace, like they dissolved into air. The ship's log showed no anomalies. Even the lifeboats were accounted for. It was as though the ocean had swallowed them whole without making a sound. 7 years passed. Jessica's world shrank to routines. She taught second grade at the same elementary school. Her mornings were filled with small voices and lesson plans, her nights with silence. The world moved on, but her mind stayed moored to the same date. The same absence? She avoided social media, was too easy to spiral, but she checked the cruise's passenger message boards obsessively. Rereading every old theory, every post from amateur sleuths, still fixated on the 2012 disappearance. It was a rainy afternoon in November when her phone rang. The name flashed across the screen. Cara D. Jessica answered immediately. "Jess, I think I saw Emily," Cara said. Jessica's throat tightened. She hadn't heard Cara's voice in nearly 3 years, not since their daughters were in middle school together. "What did you say?" she asked. Cara's voice shook. "I didn't want to call until I was sure. I saw her last week in Fremont and again today." Jessica stood frozen in her kitchen. "Fremont?" she asked. "Downtown," Cara replied. "That alleyway near Willow Street, behind the old record store. There's a row of shops, you know the kind." Jessica did, and her heart dropped. "Jess, it was quick, and maybe it's not her, but the second time I saw her face better. She looked older, but it's the same eyes, same jawline, I swear, and she wasn't alone." Jessica couldn't breathe. "Who was she with?" she asked. "I don't know," Cara said. "A man, older, gray jacket." He had his hand on her back, sort of guiding her. "They disappeared into a building before I could follow. I didn't want to scare her, but Jess, I'm telling you, it looked like Emily." That night, Jessica didn't sleep. She didn't even lie down. She sat at her dining table, her phone beside her, and stared at the photo on the wall. David, Emily, and herself on the cruise deck, sunlight caught in their smiles. That was the last day they were a family. Could it be? Was it even possible? She left for Fremont the next morning. Cara met her near the alleyway. The rain had turned to a light mist, and the streets glistened with puddles. They parked 2 blocks away and walked. Cara stopped at a corner and pointed. "There. That window behind the tinted glass." Jessica followed her gaze. It was a narrow shop front tucked between a tattoo parlor and a pawn shop. Neon lights buzzed faintly, a faint glow illuminating a thick glass pane like a fish tank from the inside. And behind the window was a figure, a girl, maybe 21, sitting alone in a narrow room lit in shifting blues and purples. Her hair was pulled back, her face older but hauntingly familiar. Her arms rested between her knees, posture still, her gaze unfocused. Jessica's chest rose with a sudden breath. It was her Emily. It had to be. She moved closer, her heart pounding so loud it felt like it echoed in the alley. And then the man stepped into view behind the girl. He placed his hand gently on her back, leaned down to whisper something. Jessica flinched instinctively. Was that David? She looked again, same build, gray streaks in the hair, the same way he used to stand behind Emily during her piano recitals, steadying her. Could it really be him? Cara touched Jessica's arm. "Do you want to go in?" Jessica opened her mouth, but no sound came. She didn't move. Something felt off. Emily didn't acknowledge her, didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't look through the glass. The man, his profile when he turned slightly, wasn't right. Jessica hesitated. "No," she whispered. Not yet. She needed to be sure. They backed away quietly. Jessica turned around once more before disappearing into the rain. She couldn't sleep that night either. She sat on the motel bed, the room dim, staring at her phone. Kara had offered to stay, but Jessica wanted to be alone. She kept thinking, if Emily is alive, where has she been? Why didn't she come home? Why would David? But none of it made sense unless that man wasn't David at all. The thought cracked through her mind like lightning. It had been 7 years. She had seen that man for mere seconds. Shadows, reflections, hope, distorted reality. Could she have wanted it so badly that her mind made it David? The next morning, Jessica and Kara returned, but the window was empty. The light inside was off, the door bolted shut. The shop's faded signage had been removed. No trace of activity. It was like the place had vanished. Panic surged. Someone. I'd seen them last night. Whoever was behind the glass had known they'd been watched. Now they were gone. Jessica contacted the local police and filed a report, reopening a missing person case after 7 years. She gave them the details. Showed old photos of Emily and David, described the alley, the window, the man's posture, the girl's expression, everything. Detectives assured her they'd investigate, but their faces showed the weight of skepticism. Another woman chasing ghosts. Jessica didn't care. She knew what she'd seen. It wasn't just a resemblance. It wasn't wishful thinking. It was Emily. Her daughter was alive, and she was with someone pretending to be her father. But why? And where were they now? As the investigation gained momentum, Jessica found herself spiraling between hope and horror, between a mother's joy and a woman's dread. Because if that wasn't David, then who was it? And what had he done with the real man Jessica loved? And why was her daughter still with him? The pieces didn't fit, but Jessica wasn't going to stop, not now, not when she was this close. Not when Emily was still within reach. Somewhere in this city, her daughter was alive, and so was the nightmare. For days after returning home from that haunting alleyway, Jessica couldn't sleep. The image of Emily behind the glass played in, a loop behind her closed eyes, her older daughter, now a grown woman, sitting in stillness, a pale shadow of the girl she once was. Jessica had spent years imagining reunions, clinging to hope with trembling hands. But nothing prepared her for this reality so surreal, it almost broke her again. She didn't tell anyone right away, not the police, not her parents, not even her therapist. She needed proof, so she went back. 2 days later, Jessica returned to the alley with a scarf wrapped tightly around her head, sunglasses masking her eyes. This time, she went alone. The street was quieter than before. The neon flicker from the windows was slower, more tired. She approached the window cautiously, her heart thumping in her ears. The room was empty. The chair where Emily had sat was still there, the same curtain drawn halfway. But the girl was gone, the man tooged a hollow space. Jessica stood there longer than she meant to, as if her sheer presence might summon them back, but nothing. Moved behind the glass, she returned the next day, and the next. Sometimes the room was lit, but empty. Sometimes another girl sat, there younger, unfamiliar, distant. Emily never returned to that window. Jessica knew what this meant. They'd seen her, or maybe they'd seen Kara, her friend, or maybe Emily, had recognized her, and that was all it took. They were gone again. This time intentionally, Kara helped as much as she could. The two combed the area, speaking in hushed tones to local shopkeepers and bartenders. Most said nothing. A few gave knowing looks and turned away. One florist just outside the alley remembered a man, an older American, maybe mid-40s. He came by every 2 weeks to buy a white lily, always paid in cash, never spoke more than 5 words, and wore dark glasses even on cloudy days. That was all they got. So Jessica went to the police. She didn't have much a blurry cell phone photo from that night, a years-old missing persons report, and a gut-deep certainty that her daughter was alive. But the officer at the desk didn't scoff or roll his eyes. He called for a detective. And within hours, Jessica found herself recounting the entire story in a narrow gray room that smelled of cold coffee and paper. The detective, a woman named Reed, asked quiet questions. She didn't promise anything, but she listened, and she believed. Reed requested surveillance footage from nearby shops. Most had overwritten files. One camera above a pawn shop across the alley had stored older data. It showed Jessica the night she and Kara had seen Emily. It captured the blurred image of the girl in the window. It was her even, with the low resolution, and the faint glow was unmistakable. The cheekbones. Yes. The curve of her mouth, Emily. A new case file was opened. Jessica felt something shift. For the first time in years, there was motion, purpose. Reed warned her it would be slow. Underground networks like these didn't just vanish. They adapted, moved, hid in plain sight. Jessica knew she couldn't stop, not now. She stayed in the city for weeks, renting a modest room above a laundromat. She joined online forums, searched missing persons databases, and cold-called shelters. Walked the red light district. Every night, retracing her steps, hoping to catch even a glimpse of Emily. One night, as rain slicked the alley in reflections of red and blue, Jessica passed the same window. This time the light was off, but in the dark, she saw movement. Shadow inside. She paused, her breath caught. Shape passed behind the curtain-tall male, then a smaller figure behind him. Her heart jumped heavily. She stepped closer, squinting past her reflection in the glass. And then, for just a moment, the curtain parted. Get face's face. Not David, not her husband, but someone else. Someone older, with a look she couldn't place. And in that split second, something inside Jessica turned cold. She didn't know who he was, but she knew this wasn't right. This wasn't what she'd been told. The curtain dropped again. The light turned on, then off, and the room stayed quiet. Jessica backed away slowly, her hands trembling, pulse hammering against her ribs. She didn't know what she'd just seen, but it wasn't her husband, and that meant her daughter had never left. She had been taken. Jessica hadn't spoken, much since returning from that alley in the city. Her silence said more than words ever could. Her friend Megan stayed with her the entire night, sleeping on the couch, while Jessica sat motionless by the window, sipping the same cup of tea for hours. Something had cracked open inside her. A hope long buried was now alive again. It's too wild to tame, too dangerous to ignore. The next morning, she didn't hesitate. Jessica went straight to the precinct. She told the officer everything from the original disappearance to the night before, to the unmistakable face she saw behind that glass. The young officer, clearly skeptical, jotted things down and asked standard questions. But Jessica saw it in his eyes. He didn't believe her. Another grieving mother, seeing ghosts. "I'm not crazy," she said, standing up. That was Emily, and the man she was with, I thought it was David, but something was off. I just need someone to help me prove I'm not imagining things. The officer offered to submit a request for camera footage from nearby shops in the alley itself. Jessica thanked him, but by then, she already had her next steps in mind. She and Megan returned to the district that same afternoon. But the window was empty. No sign of Emily, no neon glow. The building looked closed, shuttered, a heavy padlock. On the side door, no movement inside. "Maybe they moved her," Megan said softly. "Or maybe they saw us." Jessica's heart sank. She hadn't made a scene last night, but what if Emily had seen her? What if the man with her had noticed? Her instincts screamed they were gone again. They started visiting that area regularly. Jessica taking photos of every door, every face, every flicker of neon light. Megan helped her pin flyers around nearby blocks with vague text. "Missing since 2012? Any sightings? Contact below." Jessica didn't include names or photos. She didn't want the man, whoever he really was, to get spooked. A week passed. Then, too, the police hadn't found anything useful on the footage. The alley camera had been broken or wiped clean. But Jessica was relentless. She took a leave from work, drove around the city every day, sometimes sleeping in her car. Near the area, she spoke to shopkeepers, trash collectors, night shift workers. No one had seen the girl. Some looked sympathetic. Most just shrugged. One old man near a pawn shop remembered a girl with tired eyes and a man who always wore a cap low over his face. That was it. Jessica started compiling everything: notes, maps, lists, on her dining room wall. Emily's photos from age 14 side by side with a digitally aged version she created online. She memorized the face, burned it into her brain, because if she ever saw her again, she wouldn't freeze this time. But nights were hardest. That's when the questions returned. Why didn't Emily reach out in all these years? Was she being held, brainwashed, or had she changed? Jessica didn't know what was worse, the idea of her daughter being forced, or the idea of her daughter choosing to stay away. Months passed. The trail grew colder, but Jessica didn't stop. If anything, she became sharper. Calmer, a version of herself she never imagined existing. She hired a retired private investigator named Hal Cormack. Mid-60s gruff voice, kind eyes. He listened to Jessica's story without interruption, then simply said, "Let me look." Didn't move fast, but he moved smart. Within 2 weeks, he found another alley 2 blocks from the first with a similar set-up blacked-out window, neon signage. But what caught his eye was the camera above the entrance. Looked new. Jessica's stomach flipped when she saw the frame capture. Emily, clearer than before. Same blank expression, same clothes, different location. This time she wasn't alone. The man stood beside her, and for the first time, Jessica looked past her emotions and focused on the details. David, her husband, never wore leather jackets, never had that scar down his jaw, never tilted his head like that. Her heart stopped. "That's not David," she whispered. Hal leaned closer. "You sure?" Jessica nodded. "Positive." Suddenly, the horror had a new shape. The air in Jessica's lungs felt thinner with each passing hour. She hadn't slept properly since returning from the city. The image of Emily older, thinner, different burned into her memory like a branding iron. The way she sat behind that glass, the posture, the hollow look, and beside her that man, silent, still, almost a calm. She kept replaying it in her head. Could it really have been David? Could the years have changed him that much? The hair, the stance, it all matched. But there was something in the way Emily sat, not beside her father, not leaning toward him. Just there, like she was placed, like she was being watched. Jessica didn't let herself think that. It's not out loud. She kept the photo frame of their last cruise picture by her bed. Emily, pale freckles and bright smiles, leaning into David. Now that same Emily, 7 years older, looked like a shadow of herself, still recognizable, but dulled, as if someone had dimmed the brightness in her. Jessica didn't tell many people, only Clara, her oldest friend, the one who had first spotted the girl. They spoke on the phone late into the night, voices low, like they were sharing state secrets. Clara promised to drive back with her the following weeks, same time, same street. Maybe if they waited long enough, watched close enough, something would reveal itself. And it did. Thursday, just after sunset, they parked again, across from the same building. The alley pulsed with pink and blue neon. The sidewalk smelled faintly of damp cardboard and distant cologne. Jessica's palms were slick with sweat. Then she appeared, Emily, same window, same posture, same blank eyes. And beside her again, the man. This time he stood, leaning against the door frame behind her. His face wasn't visible, just the silhouette. Jessica's heart raced. Clara reached for her hand and squeezed. "That's her," Jessica whispered. "That's really her." But Clara asked, hesitant, "Do you really think that's David?" Jessica didn't answer. She didn't want to doubt not yet. They sat there until nearly midnight, but they didn't approach the window. Jessica wasn't ready. She needed a plan, a reason, something more than just instinct. But the next day they returned, and everything was gone. The alley window was dark. The neon sign still glowed, but the room behind the glass was empty. No Emily, no man, no sign. Anyone had been there. Jessica's stomach dropped. She and Clara went building to building, asking questions. Most doors stayed closed. The few that opened were either language barriers or blank stares. She showed the cruise photo, the one from 2012, to a man who ran a newsstand nearby. He squinted, rubbed his chin, then shook his head. Maybe they go around corners sometimes. I don't know. Don't get involved, he said. Jessica didn't press, but that sliver of a maybe kept her moving. She called the local police, reported a possible sighting of her missing daughter and husband. The officer on the phone was polite, cautious to cautious. Do you have a current photo of either? He asked. No, she said. They disappeared in 2012. This is all I have. The pause on the other end was long too long. We'll file this, the officer finally said. We'll send someone to take a look. Jessica didn't wait for them. She rented a small motel nearby, told Clara to go home. She needed to do this alone. No needed to walk those streets, watch those doors, see who came and went. Days passed, no sign. She visited soup kitchens, bus stations, back alleys anywhere someone might be hiding. Sometimes she thought she caught a glimpse of a familiar walk, shade of blonde that matched Emily's, but it was never her. And then, late one night, as rain fell in soft sheets, she saw something. A man alone, walking fast, hood up, carrying a heavy bag. Jessica followed, careful, her feet soaked through. He ducked into an old storage building 2 streets over. She waited 1 minute, 2:10. Then, from the side entrance, she saw another figure slip out, a girl. Blonde, same height. She didn't run. She just walked fast, head down, like she was used to not being seen. Jessica didn't chase, not yet. She stood there, frozen. Everything in her body told her to scream, but her mind was stuck. That wasn't David, she knew that now. That was someone else. And Emily was in trouble. But why was she still with him? Why hadn't she run? Jessica knew there were no easy answers. But for the first time in 7 years, she wasn't clinging to fading memories or what-ifs. Now, she had something real. She had a path, and no matter where it led, she was ready to follow. Jessica didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. She lay awake on the stiff motel mattress, staring at the ceiling, every sound from the street outside sending her nerves into overdrive. The image of that girl, the blonde figure slipping from the side door, played over and over in her mind. It had to be Emily. She was sure of it now, not just because of her hair or height, but something deeper. A mother knows. But what shook Jessica most wasn't just seeing Emily, it was the way she moved, fast, anxious, like she was trained to disappear. Like she had learned not to look up, not to ask for help, like she didn't even believe help existed. The next morning, Jessica went back to that building. She waited across the street for hours. No one came out. She started keeping notes, times, faces, vehicles. She noticed that every evening around 9 p.m., a man, mid-40s, always wearing a cap and dark jacket, would step outside for a smoke, look around slowly, then vanish back inside. He matched the silhouette she'd seen behind the glass. She didn't go to the police again, not yet. She needed more than a feeling, more than a suspicion. So, she did something she'd never imagined. She hired a private investigator. His name was Hoy, ex-military, mid-50s, quiet but sharp. He didn't ask too many questions, just listened. Took notes, and agreed to follow the man Jessica described. He said he'd start immediately. 3 nights in, Hoy called. I saw the girl, he said. Same age, same build. Came out the back exit, handed a package to someone, then went right back in. Looked disconnected, no interaction, just task. Done, Jessica's heart sank. What kind of package? She asked. Could have been anything, Hoy said. But the way it was handed off, no words, no pause. That's trained behavior. Controlled. Jessica's stomach twisted. Trained, controlled. These weren't words anyone should use when describing a 21-year-old girl, let alone one who vanished as a child. Hoy continued his surveillance. He tracked the man to different locations. Underground bar, a closed shop with blacked-out windows, a building that looked abandoned but had people coming and going at odd hours. Nothing concrete, but enough to raise alarms. Jessica went to one of those buildings herself, pretending to look for a lost dog. A woman at the door, face tight, eyes scanning, told her no one like that lives here. Try the shelters and close the door quickly. Jessica knew a lie when she heard one. Meanwhile, Hoy found a name. Guy goes by Aaron, he said. No. Last name anyone sure of? Moves around a lot. Doesn't use the same address twice. Always with that girl. Locals think it's his daughter. Jessica nearly laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because it was horrifying. He's not her father, she whispered. Hoy didn't ask how she knew. He just nodded. Then he showed her something else, a blurry surveillance still. It was Emily, closer this time, her face sharper, her eyes distant. Jessica stared at the photo for what felt like hours. She wanted to reach through the image, grab her daughter, pull her home. But they still didn't know where home was for Emily now. And that man, Aaron, was always one step ahead. By the 6th week of watching, the trail started going cold. The apartment was suddenly empty. No lights, no people, no Emily. It was like they had vanished again. Jessica broke down in the motel parking lot. Hoy stood nearby, awkward but patient, giving her space. I was right there, she cried. She was right there. Why didn't I go sooner? Hoy didn't offer comfort, but he didn't walk away either. Instead, he said something that stuck with her. Sometimes people like him teach them to run, even when the door's wide open. Jessica sat in silence, replaying the last time she saw Emily, the stillness, the hands between her knees, the tired posture. She wasn't just trained to run. She was trained not to hope. That night, Jessica made a decision. She wasn't going to lose her again. She wasn't going to wait for another chance to disappear. Hoy made some calls. He brought it. And someone who specialized in tracking off-grid people. And they started following financial crumbs. Small payments, made in cash. Patterns of movement. People who had interacted with Aaron. Eventually, a lead came from the unlikeliest source. A teenager who worked at a pawn shop said a man and a young woman had come in 2 weeks ago and sold a small bracelet, a silver one with the name Emily carved into the inside. Jessica broke when she saw the photo of it. It was the bracelet David gave Emily the night before they boarded the cruise ship. Everything inside, Jessica burned. They were still close, still moving. And now, for the first time, they had a direction. Jessica didn't know if Emily remembered her, didn't know if she trusted anything beyond the man who had stolen her life. But Jessica would find her, and this time, she would not let go. Jessica stood outside the small rusted building in Milwaukee. Her breath clouded in the early morning air. Her fists clenched so tight she could feel her fingernails cutting into her palms. Hoy stood beside her, silent, nodding once toward the windowless side door. This is it, he whispered. 7 years. 7 years of silence, of not knowing, of grief and nightmares and hoping against hope. 7 years of waking up thinking, maybe today, and going to sleep wondering if Emily was even still alive. And now this door, this quiet street, this ordinary decaying place where extraordinary pain had been hidden. They waited until just after sunrise, when the neighborhood was still sleeping, but the building inside had stirred. Lights flickered. Under the cracks in the boarded windows, a coffee machine gurgled. A car door slammed from behind. Someone was still here. Hoy moved first. He'd called in help. 2 unmarked cars were already stationed around the block. No sirens, no uniforms. Not yet. Jessica had begged for silence. She needed to see her daughter with her own eyes before anything crashed down. Inside footsteps shuffled, and then finally, the side door creaked open. It wasn't Emily. It was Himmerin. That wasn't his real name. That was the name they'd known him by. The man Jessica had thought, had feared, might have been David. But standing there now, Jessica saw it plainly. He was not David. He was older than David, heavier, his eyes darting like a rat's, nervous, calculating. His hand twitched toward the door, but Hoy was faster, gun drawn, calm. Don't, Hoy warned. 2 more plainclothes officers appeared from the alley and behind the parked car. The man froze, then slowly backed up, hands in the air. Inside, footsteps rushed. Jessica pushed forward into the dim hallway. Then, there she was, Emily, pale, her hair longer, matted, thin, too thin. wearing an oversized sweatshirt and jeans, barefoot, frozen in the hallway like a deer caught in headlights. Jessica whispered, "Emily, it's me." For a second, nothing, no reaction, no recognition. Then her eyes, wide, flickered to the man in cuffs and finally back to Jessica. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracked, dry, small. Jessica ran forward and pulled her into her arms. Emily didn't move at first. She just stood, stiff and shocked. But then, like a switch, her arms wrapped around Jessica's shoulders, and she collapsed into her mother's chest, sobbing. It was real. This moment was real. The nightmare had cracked open, and daylight was flooding in. Back at the police station, everything came out. Aaron, whose real name was Malcolm Breener, was a drifter with a long record of fraud and identity manipulation. But what he did to Emily and David was something far darker. Jessica listened in horror as detectives laid out the story piece by piece. 7 years ago, during the cruise, David had noticed Malcolm watching families. He'd approached David, claiming to be a former crew member. They'd chatted once or twice, nothing suspicious. But that night, the last night anyone saw them, David and Emily had gone for a walk on the upper deck. Jessica had stayed behind with a migraine. That was when it happened. Malcolm lured David away from Emily, telling him there was a problem with another guest. When David followed Malcolm, struck him a heavy blow to the back of the head. David didn't die instantly, but he fell and never woke up. Malcolm panicked, but then he looked at Emily alone, confused and afraid and realized something. He could use her. He posed as her father, told crew members that his wife had gotten sick, that they were leaving early. No one questioned it. They disembarked quietly the next morning with Emily drugged and half aware in his arms. And from there it began. Malcolm changed names, towns, appearances. He moved constantly, never staying more than 6 months in one place. He told Emily that her mother had died, that her father him had saved her, that no one else was left. Emily, heartbroken and confused, believed him, especially as he mixed just enough drugs into her routine to dull her memories, blur her thinking, and keep her dependent. Over time, she stopped asking questions, stopped hoping. He kept her close, not just out of control, but obsession. He used her for illegal activities, drug running, distraction schemes, even small-time smuggling. She was a pawn in his life, a child shaped into silence, until now, till Jessica saw her behind that red-lit window. Later that night, Jessica sat in the hospital room beside Emily. The doctors said her memory would return slowly, if at all. Some things were locked behind trauma. Some were just buried under years of lies. Emily was asleep now, and 4 dripping slowly. Jessica held her hand, watching the monitor beep gently. Hoy came to the door and knocked once, softly. "They've officially charged him," he said. "Murder, abduction, trafficking, a dozen counts." Jessica nodded. She didn't feel relief, not yet, just peace. For the first time in 7 years, the silence wasn't heavy anymore. The mystery didn't have to torture her. She had her daughter back. And though there was still healing to do, long days ahead, they would do it together, at last. It rained the day Emily returned home, not a heavy storm, just a quiet, steady drizzle that tapped against the windows like a lullaby. Jessica sat beside her daughter on the old living room couch, wrapped in a quilt Emily had once slept under as a child. They didn't say much, words still felt fragile, but silence didn't hurt anymore. Emily traced her fingers over a framed photo on the table, their last family picture from the cruise. Her eyes lingered on her father's face. "I miss him," she whispered. Jessica nodded, her voice catching. "Me too." There was still therapy, court dates, questions to answer, pieces to rebuild. But for now, for this moment, all that mattered was that Emily was safe, that Jessica could finally breathe. Outside, the rain softened. Inside, a mother and daughter began again, not with answers, but with each other.